Are you suggesting that someone's trying to make a real-life sequel?
Stab 2? Who'd want to do that? Sequels suck.
No, come on, man.
Oh, please. By definition alone, they're inferior films.
Bullshit generalization. Many sequels have surpassed their original.
Oh, yeah?
Name one.
I'll be back.
Freedom, you're my older brother, and I love you. But don't ever take sides with anyone against the family you live. Never.
I just can't believe you came here and did it again. You guys give up or you're thirsty for more?
Welcome back to Duel of the Greats Season 4, Episode 2. Thank you for joining us again. I'm Steve, one of your hosts. We have two other hosts here. We got Nate and Jeff. Fellas, welcome in. Hello. How are you?
Much more lighthearted week after The Godfather.
Yes, definitely.
It
I'm
is
excited
gonna
about
be-
the lightheartedness of this week's films.
Yeah, it's a little bit less violent. A few less explosions and gunshot wounds. We have our fantastic producer, Brandon. Hello. Making sure everything runs on the back end. And we've got a treat for you tonight. I feel like we haven't had a big opportunity in this series to do a whole lot of comedies. We did a few maybe last season, but not even some, there was some sort of roundabout comedies, like The Bug's Life and Ants and things like that. This is just a classic romantic, well, not even really romantic, just kind of a classic comedy. It's a Nancy Meyers comedy, if people know Nancy Meyers. We're doing Father of the Bride and Father of the Bride Part 2. Those are our movies for this week. If you're keeping along at home, starring Steve Martin, Diane Keaton, and various other people that I don't know have been really in much ever since. Well, Martin Short, I guess. Some guy named Kieran Culkin.
There's a Culkin.
That is.
Culkin?
Yeah.
Kieran?
There's a
Roy?
Culkin. It's a Kieran.
Yeah.
There's like 15 of them, but that's the one in this. But anyway.
Oscar winner.
Yeah, Oscar winner Kieran Culkin. That still doesn't seem right, does it? But anyway, so if you're new for some reason and joining us on this episode, what we're going to do, we're going to have one of our intrepid hosts stump for one of the movies, or argue its relative merits, and another host is going to say, "No, you're wrong, you stupid asshole." That's kind of mean, and we're normally not quite that mean to each other, but sometimes we can be. Anyway, tonight we have Nate is arguing for the original Father of the Bride, and Jeff is going to be Father of the Bride Part 2, and they're going to try to get me to side with them on which one is better, the original or the sequel. That's the shtick. That's what we're doing all season. What's better, the original or the sequel? And I know, Jeff, I think at one point you had a theory that somebody on Reddit is listening to our podcast, because it seemed like when we release things, there'd be some very interesting posts in the movie subreddits that were very similar to certain things we would cover. Do you remember this?
I do, yes. It's happened
Yeah.
quite a few times.
Well, I saw another one last week, and it was, I can't remember exactly how it was worded, but it was something, it didn't say sequel, but it said a movie and its predecessor or a successor or something like that. I'm like, these bastards, they're listening, they're stealing our fame. All for the Reddit upvotes, which, as we know, are very useful in real life. So, anyway, if you're out there listening, here's another one for you. You guys have any housekeeping? Anything you want to talk about? Anything you want to share with our fans? You want to talk about our first experiences with these movies? I've never seen them.
Well, you were just asking right before we signed on what our first Steve Martin movie was, or Brandon, our producer, was asking what our first Steve Martin movie was, and for me, I think it was these movies. There were definitely jokes that went over my head when I was a little kid, but I remember watching both of these movies. I think my mom took us to see Father of the Bride Part 2 in theaters, and I probably would have been about 9 or 10 years old. So I mean, I think this was my introduction to really the whole cast: Steve Martin, Diane Keaton, Martin Short. I think this was kind of my first movie for all those people.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because if I had to say, like, these movies are probably the first that I remember as like Steve Martin movies. But if I really think about it, I think it was probably Little Shop of Horrors was my first because I remember seeing that when I was really little, and Steve Martin was in that. But like, not only was I knew Rick Moranis because of Ghostbusters, um, but I don't know that I really knew who Steve Martin was at the time. And then obviously seeing these, so Little Shop of Horrors might have actually been the first, but the first, like, my first memory of a Steve Martin movie would definitely be these two for sure.
Yeah, I feel like Steve Martin was just always around. I can't even tell you the first thing I actually saw him in. I know I saw him in Cheaper by the Dozen, which I was telling Nate and Brandon before we got on. Every memory I thought I had of these movies was actually Cheaper by the Dozen. So, and that's not a
You
very
had
good.
never seen these movies before this week.
No, no. And you know, a lot of times when we do this, I'll be like, I don't think I've seen this, and then something will click. Inside Man was quite the example of that, if you guys remember. But no, watching these, I just nothing. I'm like, oh, everything was a surprise. It was kind of fun, actually.
This is two
Uh,
weeks in a row where, like, we watched The Godfather a little bit ago, but within the last 6 months for both of those. So this is
yeah,
brand new territory these first 2 weeks for Steve
it-
here.
I should probably say, I think it's probably important to note the whole reason we're doing these two movies is these are my wife's favorite movies. And she requested if we were going to continue the charade of a podcast that we cover maybe these two movies when I mentioned the original versus sequel, she was like, you should do Father of the Bride and Father of the Bride Part 2. So yeah. So
here we are.
that's kind of why
Doing it.
that's kind of what shout out to my wife Maggie. It was actually her birthday yesterday, so
Oh
if
yeah, happy
she's
birthday!
out there listening,
Excellent.
so here we go.
We're doing this just for you.
Yeah, these are definitely movies that I like. My family always loved movies, and these are definitely ones that were always on. Like, we always had like HBO and Showtime and all those growing up, and so these movies were always on. And if they were on, my family was stopping, and we were all gonna watch. So this always kind of makes me think of my family.
All right. Well, I'm glad to get the background because I'm very, very curious to hear your guys' arguments because I have some preconceived notions as the judge, but I'm going to try to set them all aside and do this as fairly and as by the book as I can based on the arguments you guys present. So, Counselor Nate, would you like to begin with Father? Hang on. Brandon would kill me if I didn't drop the socials. So if you guys want to send us any feedback about this, you can. We have email, duelofthegreats@gmail.com, at duelofthegreats for Instagram, Threads, I think we're on Threads, and then at Duel Podcast on TikTok. So the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. I will start with we kind of have 3 points.
Excellent start already, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah, three points. I will say that this week, all three of my points for a movie like this kind of blend together, but I'm going to try to talk about them all separately and not blur the line too much. So I'm just going to start with the first point, and it's this: the original Father of the Bride. And admittedly, this is a little bit subjective, but the original Father of the Bride for me is just a funnier movie. I think it's funnier for a couple of reasons. I think that it's quippier, it's wittier. The funniest lines from these two movies come from the original Father of the Bride. But most importantly, its comedy comes from something that is relatable and true. And I think that, without stepping on my own point here in a few minutes, I think that Father of the Bride Part 2 kind of gets away from that, whereas there is this really relatable quality to the comedy of the first Father of the Bride. A couple of examples when they've briefly broken off the wedding, and his daughter Annie is relating this thing to her dad about, and then he said I was overreacting. I said, why would I overreact? No one in my family overreacts. And just this look that Steve Martin gives her. There's kind of moments like that, these sort of very true parental moments. And I think most of the comedy for this really emanates from that. I think that Father of the Bride Part 2 is funny. I enjoy both of these movies immensely. Again, just because I grew up with them and I've watched them for a long time. And my wife, we rewatch them a lot because they're her favorite movies. Um, I just think that there are funnier things in Father of the Bride. I think, maybe the funniest moment of either movie is the grocery store crash out, where he is taking these superfluous buns, as he says, out of the bag because he wants to buy the same amount of hot dog buns and hot dogs. And does the George Banks is saying no, and the little cashier guy's like, "Who's George Banks?" He's like, "Me." It's like a very classic Steve Martin delivery. And so again, I'm admitting there's a bit of subjectivity to this, but I just think that it's funnier, and I think that a lot of that comedy comes from things that are a little bit more relatable than Father of the Bride Part 2.
Excellent point.
Um,
Counselor, would you like to cross?
yeah, it's hard because it's hard to cross without getting into one of
You don't
my own
have to.
points.
You don't have to.
So
You
I'll
can cede it. You can
probably
say he
just
wins.
kind
That's fine.
of I mean,
I
ultimately I disagree with the fundamental point that part 1 is funnier than part 2. I disagree with that, and I'll leave it at that for now because I'll part of my reasons or part of my points that I will bring up, we'll get into it in greater detail.
I love your reasoning. You're like the referee last night on Monday Night Football when the Chiefs called 2 timeouts in a row, and the ref was like, "That's against the rules because you can't do that."
It was great the
Your
way he
defense
called it.
is
Even the announcers
He's
were like,
doing
"Well,
a
wait,
guy,
I
yeah.
think that's their
Yeah.
second timeout. They just called back to back. The ref just came out. They called back to back timeouts. You can't do that." Just like moved on.
I like it.
Um,
You're wrong
so I
because you're wrong.
Um, so my second point, I think is, and again, a lot of these are kind of blurring together. I'm trying not to blur them together too much. I think that the first Father of the Bride, its story and its comedy and everything comes from something that is relatable. When we are looking at something that is a family comedy, which both of these are, and I think they're both really good family comedies, the comedy has to emanate again from something that's true. This is going to be a little bit more of a kind of a me digging at Father of the Bride Part 2. Father of the Bride Part 2, a lot of the comedy is based on these sort of plot contrivances that do not really ring true. I want to tread very lightly with what I'm about to say, though I've gotten permission from some other women in my life that they agree with this point. To have the Diane Keaton character also be pregnant during this movie um, is just that's sort of the central comedic element of the whole thing, is that this mother and daughter are pregnant together. It just doesn't really ring true. We were actually talking again right before we started recording. Diane Keaton was 49 years old when this movie was released. Now, again, I want to be very, very clear. Women can and should and do whatever they want with their lives and choose to have children whenever they want in their lives. I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm not speaking at all about women's bodily autonomy whatsoever. But the fact of the matter is that it is simply not a realistic thing to have a mother that age and a daughter that age both pregnant at the same time. And so for that reason, the first Father of the Bride, so much of its comedy comes from a very relatable experience. Now it's not an experience that I've had. My children are young, so I've not had the opportunity. If my children choose to get married, I've not had the opportunity to be the father of a bride or groom. But it's an experience that many, many people have, and it feels true because the things that Steve Martin is saying are experiences that people all over the world have. He has this sort of ethos of the whole movie in the very opening scene of the first Father of the Bride. he's sort of relating all these things about your daughter starts to grow up and she's doing this and this, and you're worried about her meeting all these bad guys and the wrong guys. And then he says, and then one day a new fear emerges. One day she'll meet the right guy. And I think that that is a very, very common experience. I don't think it's a very common experience for Steve Martin to be, running around, and he has a pregnant wife who's pushing 50, and then the pregnant daughter that also another total plot contrivance. What do you know? Her husband isn't in town. So he has both his wife and his daughter in the same household. Again, it's fun. I love the movie. It's a funny movie. I just think that we're really pushing the suspension of disbelief. Again, I keep coming back to these word contrivances. I think that the plot and the comedy is not built around something relatable. It's built around what would be funny, what a screenwriter thought would be funny to kind of put into these scenes together. And again, I think for that reason, I think the first Father of the Bride it's just a stronger story. It's a stronger movie.
All right.
It's a fact. Can you follow?
So, first of all, just as a sort of point of reference for something that exists in the real world, okay? Two-time Academy Award-winning actress Hilary Swank gave birth to twins in April of 2023 at the age of 48. So this is not something that is like, oh my God, this is some scientific miracle or completely unusual or anything like that. That's number one. Number two, you're talking about Diane Keaton's actual age, but it was never made clear in the movie what their ages were. In fact, they said that they were really young when they had their daughter. They mentioned that specifically in the first movie, like 20-ish or so. And she's presumably somewhere between 25 and 27. So she's probably playing a character, Diane Keaton, that is a little bit younger than even her actual age, which is very rare in Hollywood. But if we're to truly do the math and play it out like that, I think that's exists. So again, it is definitely more on the unusual side for women in their 40s, just because so often it's medically it's recommended not to do that, to get pregnant in your 40s. There's a lot more complications, etc. But they also recognize that, and they discuss that in the movie, and they talk about it. So you know just to say like that's a contrivance, I don't feel that that's necessarily fair. And I think that when you're talking about something relatable, like it's not, I think having a child, obviously only half the population can relate to that directly, but also the idea of supporting, your spouse and your daughter as they're having children is something relatable. Developing your family, adding new members to your family, that is something that is relatable as well. So I don't know that I would necessarily characterize those arguments as fair.
I think you make some great points. I want to be clear again. I'm not saying it's a physical impossibility for women to have children in their late 40s, nor am I saying that women. I know our female listeners will be very happy to know that we're all very progressive-minded men here, and I'm sure they'd love to hear what we have to say about the right age to have children. I'm not saying that it's a physical impossibility, and I think you do bring up a good point that Diane Keaton's age, it never firmly establishes that, but it does say in the first movie that they had her very young. In fact, if I'm recalling, I think Annie, the daughter, is 21. And he says, "What, you're too young?" And she says, "What? She's the same age that I was when I was married, And then and I think she says, "No, I was a year younger when we were married. I was this age when I was pregnant with her." So I think it establishes that the Diane Keaton character would have been like in her early 20s when she had her oldest kid, and maybe it would be more like her mid 40s. So that's fair if we're doing the math. I think that my general point still stands, that it is more likely in terms of relatability, and I don't have these statistics in front of me, but I'm going to go out, I just have a hunch that it's more likely that someone could relate to their daughter getting older or any of their children getting older and dealing with the complications of their children getting older and getting married and starting their own families, versus having a middle age, I think that's fair to say, pushing middle age. And by the way, it's also a plot point in part 2 that she believes she's going through menopause. So that's as it's written in the movie. So she believes that she's old enough to be going through menopause. I just don't think that it's, again, looking at like, okay, being a father of a bride, that's pretty relatable, versus having a wife and a daughter who are pregnant at the same time and both living in your house at the same time. To me, again, that just doesn't ring very true. There's also a lot of like, I didn't even mention like the whole thing about there's a lot of kind of on the same point. There's a lot of like Father of the Bride is a very like show don't tell. Like we kind of realize this crisis he's going through without it ever being like spelled out for us. Whereas Father of the Bride Part 2, there's this whole first act sequence where it's just like it could not hit you any harder in the face of like, I'm going through a midlife crisis. I'm going to drive a cool car and dye my hair and go to the gym. It's a very like telly kind of way to communicate that story. Again, I go back to the word contrivance a little bit. I just feel like that's kind of a very simple way to tell that story. But that's just what I think. I have a third point, but I want to give Jeff the opportunity to respond to anything else I said there.
I'll leave that for now because that gets into one of my points.
Okay. My final point, and again, I've said this several times, they're all kind of bleeding into each other here. This movie is relatable, not just with its comedy, but with its heart. I think that this movie has, the first Father of the Bride, has more moments that truthfully and realistically and in a relatable way pull at your heartstrings than Father of the Bride Part 2. Now, I will give Father of the Bride Part 2 credit. There's a scene at the end where he's holding his grandchild and his child, both newborn babies, at the same time in the hospital, and it is a remarkably beautiful scene that you would have to have no pulse to not be moved a little bit by that scene. However, the moments in Father of the Bride, I think, that ring a little bit more true to me. There's a particular moment where it's the day before her wedding, and she's staying in their house one more time, and he's walking away like George Banks, Steve Martin, is going to bed, and his son goes, "Hey, Annie," and she's like, "Yeah," and he's like, "Good night, love you," and she goes, "Good night, buddy, love you too," and he just like puts his hand on his heart because it's just like it just kills him. And then in the very next moment there, he lies in bed and he recalls. Then they have this incredible montage of all these moments of Annie growing up at these various stages in life. Oh man, it's and again, I'm a father, but I don't even think you necessarily have to be a father to find some relatability to that. And to me, that moment, and I'm probably being biased because I am a father, that moment really just rings very, very true to me. Now, again, someone may say, I've never held my own grandchild. Again, my kids aren't old enough. Maybe there's something in part 2 that I'm missing, and that very much could be true. But I just think that the relatability of how it relates with his heart, it just feels more true to me.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that you talk about the whole sort of sequence of him dyeing his hair and going to the gym and all that in the second one as maybe a little bit too overt, and then praise the first one for the hand over the heart scene and the ridiculously, you could argue, emotionally manipulative montage of her growing up. I mean, I am touched as well, just because I love these movies, so I'm not really like hurting
Yeah,
it, but I'm
I
just
mean, and
saying.
I love both of them. Yeah.
But I'm just saying, it's, if we're trying to be consistent, I don't know that either one is really something that I would put in the subtle category for movies. So that's another thing that I don't know that I would necessarily say that is a something that the first one holds over the second one.
All fair points.
Feel
I'm
free to
honestly ready to hear Jeff's But
Yeah, I
I'm
was gonna
honestly a little
say, Jeff, feel
curious because
free
he's
to
holding
go.
back, and I want to hear where he's going.
All right.
Holding back like
So
an Austrian
if
wedding
if
planner.
so you're fully done then. You're ready for me then. All right.
I'm
So
ready. I'm ready for you. I want to hear it all.
okay. So for my first point, I think, and this is where I kind of with your sort of ties into all your points a little bit. You talk about how relatable the first movie is and how that is something that it holds over or that it does better than the second one. And I mean, to a certain extent I can agree because yes, it's way more common to be a father of the bride than it is to have your wife and daughter pregnant at the same time. 100% totally more way more common. But with that said, I think what the movies both examine is the first one, the movie sort of examines George Banks and Nina Banks as parents. What was their what were they like as parents? What type of daughter did they raise? And then looking back on that and sort of like it like the scene you already talked about where we talked about the age and he was like, we were way older and she was Diane Keaton's like, no, we weren't. We were, I was younger than she was and all this stuff. So, it's and sort of that way of like, okay, how you remember how you were versus how you actually were. And as someone who, I just turned 40 this year, so I've kind of, had my own little piece of that as well, where it's just like you sort of look back and you remember yourself a certain way, but that's not necessarily how you will all how everyone else remembers it, and maybe how it even actually was. So there's that aspect that the first movie sort of that's the sort of subtext of that. But with the second movie, I think it really the idea it hammers home much more the idea of aging and coming to grips with that, and I think it does a better job of dealing with that topic than the first one does with dealing with just parenting and sort of letting go of your child. I think the you call it a contrivance to have it a plot where his wife is pregnant at the same time as his daughter, but as a plot point, whether you feel it's contrived or not, it is very effective in getting across what it needs to get across, which is just this idea of oh no, am I going to be able to do that? However old they're supposed to be, mid to late 40s, whatever, you know, he jokes about it in during the movie. I can't remember the exact sequence of jokes, but he talks about how old he's going to be when the kid gets to high school and when the kid graduates college and all this stuff and being like, oh, we'll be in a wheelchair or whatever the case may be. And then the very very sort of poignant scene where this kind of they get into a bit of a fight, George and Nina do, where she's like, I know exactly how old I am. I know who I am. I know what I want to be. And, you know, if you don't want to be a part of this, then you just need to leave. And there's this idea of being unsure of yourself, being unsure of who you are as you age and what that aging is doing to you versus, someone like his wife who's very confident in that, who knows who she is and very confident in how she's aging and doesn't care about, you know, what her hair color is or anything like that. I think it just throughout the movie, I think it does a better job of hammering home its point for the second one than the first one does. For it, and it's not to say that the first one is bad at that, of course. I just think that the second one does that better.
But does the second one do that better? I see
Yes,
what
I
you're
just said it
saying.
did.
I see.
Touche.
I see what you're. I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying about how in the matter of it dealing with aging, and I'm fine with that argument, except that I feel like it's not really doing it better because instead of actually having the characters deal with that in a realistic way, what does it do? It has them hit an unrealistic reset button in which they are now having a kid another kid at and again, this is according to the characters in the movie, at a very advanced age. I feel like, again, that just
Advanced in
doesn't
terms of giving birth.
Yes, but I just think that if I think that for the argument to ring true, there would have to be something a little bit more profound in the message about like there's a great for I'll tell you, for me, honestly, what you're arguing is best exemplified. There is a scene in part 2 where their daughter Annie comes really late at night and he's talking to her and she basically reveals that she's gotten this job offer in Boston. And he's very kind of calm and mild mannered about it. And even though he knows that this is going to destroy him, that his daughter is going to move across to the other side of the country, he says, "Annie, you have to go. You can't." That to me is a more like that one moment is far more realistic than, oh, George and Nina are literally having a baby. That doesn't seem like it's actually, from a story perspective, doesn't really seem like that's making the point that I think you think it's making. I just don't think that that's a very again. I just don't think that's a realistic way to to examine characters getting older and dealing with their age.
I mean, you're kind of stuck on this realism aspect, which we've already established that it is something that canon does happen. So not usual, perhaps, but it is something that is realistic as something that could happen. And I would guess it's probably far more common than we realize, though not, again, it's not something I would say is common. But regardless, you know, this is where we talk about in so many different movies, no matter what across the genre, you talk about suspension of disbelief, right? So if you can, oh, well, you can't go 3 times light speed. Star Wars is so unrealistic. It's like, shut up, And I'm not telling you to shut up, Nate, but like the, you know, getting hung up on those things just makes it hard to then try and accept what the point is. And if you can just accept, okay, she's older and she's pregnant, it probably wouldn't happen for the vast majority of people, but it's happening here. So why are they making that choice as filmmakers? Why are they putting us in this position as an audience to see this? And it's to reveal these things, to reveal these aspects of George's character where he says, oh, I am, on the one hand, he's struggling with not being ready for it, and then on the other hand, he's trying to make himself young again so that he can feel ready for it because he feels unprepared at the age he is. So I think that it's not necessarily the idea of her being pregnant that is the movie is trying to say is profound, but the idea of him dealing with this intense, very specific confrontation with age and with aging is something that I think is profound.
I'll let that point sit. You can go to your next point.
All right. So for my next point, so the very end of The Godfather Part 2 has a scene where both Nina and Annie go into labor at the same time.
You mean
And
father? You mean
That's a
Father the
different
Bride
movie
Part
than I
2?
watched.
You
Say
said
what?
Godfather Part 2.
Did I say God? Oh, Jesus. It's been a long week. Sorry. Father of the Bride Part 2.
Was it the director's cut?
The director's cut, yeah. That's why Marlon Brando couldn't get back. He was at the hospital.
Yeah,
Um,
that's what happened.
so Father of the Bride Part 2, the Nina and Annie are given Diane Keaton in all 4 movies though. Nina and Annie are giving birth at the
Diane,
same time.
come
And
on, we'd love to talk to you.
this this um this sequence that they have is just like comedic genius. Okay, the setup here is that Franck, the Martin Short character, George Banks has been just sleep deprived. He just needs some rest. He just needs something. And Martin Short, Franck, he's like, hey, take these pills. They're totally good." And he's like, they're not legal in America right now, but I take them all the time." And so he's like, "Okay," but he takes too much because he doesn't know what they are. He basically just falls over standing. He's so then they go into labor. They're going to the hospital, and he has to like wake himself up. He almost gets I think it was like a vasectomy or something that he was going in there for, or some sort of surgery, and they start like undressing him, and that wakes him up. That gets him out of his stupor, and he comes out, and then he is not. This is the classic trope with any movie dealing with a birth, right? The great doctor that you select, hand select and is perfect for you, is not available the day of the pregnancy, right? Happens. Knocked Up. I just watched Knocked Up the other day. Same thing happened. This every movie where somebody gives birth, it's the same
That's
thing. That's what happened.
the scene Knocked Up where he calls the doctor. He's like, "You are fucking Tupac. You are fucking Biggie. I'm gonna murder you." It's my favorite scene of the whole movie. Okay, sorry, continue. I
Yeah,
do love
that's a
that
great
part.
scene.
Knocked Up.
No, that's a good interruption. Um, but yeah, and then God, and I cannot remember the name of this actress. I've seen her in a bunch of stuff. She was married to Chris Kattan for a while. I cannot, or not Chris Kattan, Fred Armisen. I can't remember her name. But anyway, she is she great actress, and she's playing this young doctor, or she seems young, and then again, he's talking about, because it's this sort of inverse of what he's dealing with AIDS, and he's like, well, this person's too young to do this properly. They don't even have the experience. And then she whips out like, oh, 297 births that she's given, or whatever, or that she's delivered, not counting the 2 this morning or whatever. And then there's this whole he's going back and forth between the rooms, and he's talking to the doctor and trying to get everything going, and Frank's helping out, and they're going back and forth, running around like, it's a Benny Hill movie or something. And it's just it's something where, when you want to look back at like how and why are people like Steve Martin and Martin Short considered comedic geniuses, you look at a scene like that and the way they play off each other and the way they bounce off everything, and it's just phenomenal. It's a fantastic scene, and I think that climax, regardless of what you think about the realism, or whatever, of the mother getting pregnant, the climax of those two delivering birth at the same time and how that plays out on screen is much funnier and more interesting than the way the wedding plays out at the end of the first one, which I think is the least interesting part of the first movie.
I won't debate that it is a really entertaining sequence at the end of part 2. I think you're underselling the end of part 1, and I think that the anticlimax in some ways is kind of the point of the entire story. And again, I think speaks a little bit more to this idea of aging and letting your children go. I think in a kind of a more powerful way. That he actually makes this point of saying, "I was not going to miss this." And he's talking about her throwing the bouquet, and he ultimately misses it. And his wife kind of there's like, he missed it, and then but later she calls him. His daughter calls him from the airport and just, "I love you, Dad. I didn't see you when I left the house. I love you." Um, I think that the anticlimax is a little bit more the point, but again, I'm not going to debate that it's a really entertaining sequence at the end of part 2. So I'll let you proceed.
The scene in the first one where the 2 kids end up parking all the cars, that one's pretty good.
Yeah. I kind of
That's
forget it. Honestly, speaking of contrivances, I mean, that's a little silly. I mean,
yeah,
I'll give
that
you that. I'll give you that. That's perhaps not the most realistic comedy setup, but it is funny.
that was
I was
yeah,
really jealous of those kids when I
incredibly
was
dangerous.
little.
I
Yeah.
know, right? Yeah, there's
No,
no
they got
way
to
they
drive around
park
the
all those
cars.
cars without like totaling half of them.
I know.
Anyway, my final point, okay, and we've hardly talked about this, which I'm almost glad, because I get to bring it up as the final point here. Um, I will die on this hill that Frank Egelhofer, as played by Martin Short, is one of the best characters in motion picture history. He's a phenomenal character. He is played so perfectly well. He's just hilarious. He steals every scene that he's in, and in both movies. And he's like the perfect sort of foil antagonist to the George Banks character for a movie that it doesn't necessarily need a huge antagonist, and it doesn't, but he provides one that allows him to sort of bounce off while sort of highlighting all of his insecurities while simultaneously helping him overcome them. And the reason I bring that up as a point in the for the second one is because they really lean into the Franck character to a greater degree in the second one, and the BD Wong character as well. I cannot remember his name off the top of my head, but the interplay between he and Martin Short is hilarious. But obviously the bread and butter of it is Martin Short and Steve Martin just complete like the scenes where he's doing the dance aerobics class with the two of them when they're pregnant, and it's just hilarious. Like I already mentioned the scene where he gives them the sleeping pills, but then also a just like a very touching scene near the end when they had hired Franck to design the baby suite for George and Nina's new baby, and it's finally revealed, and you know George and Steve Martin is a just flabbergasted at how amazing it is, and he's all ready to get angry and all this stuff, and he just turns to him and he's like, Franck is perfect, and Franck is nearly about to cry, and it's just a really very touching scene where you have two people where for the first movie and some of the second as well, George is sort of resented Franck because he represents everything that he hates. He's so cheap, and it's Franck is not that way, and he causes him to spend a lot of money, and it means some big change is coming into his life every time he sees him, and it sort of brings it all together, and it's just like, okay, now these two have an understanding with each other, and it's just a really for a movie, and this goes for both movies really. um for movies it's sort of on their face as sort of just kind of milk toast as just the idea of a father of the bride. They have some really poignant scenes in both movies, and it's a credit to the actors that they're able to pull them off. And when you have a character as outlandish as Hook and all that, and being able to pull off that scene in the baby suite and everything is was just it was really, I think it's one of the highlights, probably the highlight of both movies for me, where you just really get as big of an emotional impact as any other scene. And the fact that they put that in there and then just leaned into giving Franck more screen time in the second one, I think is another thing that just elevates the second one over the first.
I have no further counter arguments. I'm ready to move on to my closing statement, if it will please the court.
It does. It pleases me greatly.
Your Honor, I'd like you to just, I want you to think about this, and I want you to just ask yourself a question, okay? Family comedies have to derive from relatability. The reason that we laugh at family comedies is because we relate to them. We see our own families and our own selves in the situations. And that's why we quote them. That's why we laugh about them. Everything from sitcoms to road movies with families. The reason that we laugh at those things, the reason we find them entertaining, is because we all come from families and everybody has some kind of dysfunction in their family, and that is that is where the comedy derives from. It derives from a type of truth about what makes us laugh and what families are. The question I'm going to ask you, Your Honor, that I just want you to consider as you're hearing these closing arguments is simply this. Watching both of these movies, Father of the Bride and Father of the Bride Part 2, which one feels the most true to you? Which one feels like some reflection, maybe not of your family, but some reflection of an actual American family and the issues that they may go through in either of the situations that are presented in these movies. Which one feels the most true? Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Jeffrey.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, what my esteemed colleague is suggesting is again this ideal of realism as a requirement for making a family comedy. When I look at something like National Lampoon's Vacation or Christmas Vacation, I don't necessarily see those as all that realistic or something that's super relatable in the sense that, oh, this could be me. But I think what those movies do, and I think what Father of the Bride, not it's not anywhere close to any National Lampoon's movie, but the idea, if you want to play out the conceit that it sort of slips into this more unrealistic area, I don't necessarily see where that's a bad thing. I think just like what those National Lampoon movies do, exaggeration, expressionism, things like these are valid forms of art to try and get a point across. It would be similar to saying, oh, well, Picasso wasn't as good of an artist because his drawings weren't as realistic as Caravaggio's were, right? And it's that is it may be true that they're not as realistic, but it doesn't make them any less artistic. It doesn't make it so that it doesn't achieve what it's trying to achieve as a piece of art. And if you want to play that out for Father of the Bride Part 2, then I think the same point still stands that yeah, maybe there's some things that are a little bit more unrealistic. Maybe they had to stretch things a little bit more for the second one, but they do it in service of making the broader points that they want to make, which in turn I think makes the choices that they did make use that word too many times in that sentence, but it makes the choices that they chose to make, it makes them relevant and it makes them understandable because of what they reveal about the characters once we get past the fact that they made those choices in the first place.
All right. You both given me a lot to think about, just like last week. This is a very unenviable position to be in, to be the judge 2 weeks in a row. We're setting the tone for the entire season, and you guys have given me a lot to consider. It's it's difficult because I personally had a preference for one of the two until a certain point in that movie. And then they wound up essentially being a push in my mind. So this is very, very difficult. Addressing your points, specifically the funnier, whether it's funnier or not, I think, Nate, going back to yours, I think that is a push. I'm going with Jeff. That's a push because you can find humor in both, and they both do different things very good. The one that I keep getting hung up on, and I understand it, Jeff. I understand that it's possible to have a child at this age, but it's not the scientific fact of it that is hanging me up. It is, and Nate, you really hit it, I think, with the word contrivance. It is an unnecessary plot development to put them in a situation that is more heightened and more exaggerated than the universe of the first movie. So I think this is going to go, when we set down ground rules at the beginning of this, we said we can't do second movie is better because it's bigger, it's more bombastic or whatever. And then I think we also talked about, we can't say the second movie builds on what the first movie gives and all this other. Go ahead.
Well, it was like you can't be like, oh, the special effects are better
Yeah, sure.
than the second one. Yeah, stuff like that.
I think there's kind of an inverse to this that I don't want to slip too far down this road because I think it's a slippery slope. But I think a sequel has to justify itself somehow to be truly worth the watch, so to speak. It doesn't have to necessarily be doing something totally different. It doesn't have to be a retread of the first thing. That would be kind of boring, right? But it has to have a reason for existing. And I think the first 30, 40 minutes of Father of the Bride 2, it had me. I'm like, I love this one better than the first one. I think George Banks in Father of the Bride 2 is a more interesting character. He's less of a kind of a curmudgeonly asshole that he is in the first one. He's very, very unreasonable in the first one. Again, a lot of this is it's kind of a heightened reality, and it goes back to the, there's no one in your family, or no one in your family overreacts. His whole shtick is overreacting. But I found him more likable in the second one, and the themes of growing older and changing and coming to terms with all that. Jeff, you're spot on. All that, it was hitting real hard, and then boom, Diane Keaton's pregnant. I just don't know that was necessary. You could have explored all those themes, all the other things about aging and all that, through the lens of him dealing with Annie, as you pointed out, Nate, getting a job, moving away, him supporting her. What does it mean to be a father as he ages? A father to her, not to a brand new baby. So to me, the contrivance of the baby, good word, I got kind of hung up on it a little bit. Not that it was unnecessary or unrealistic, not that it was unrealistic, but almost that it was unnecessary. And so it's a very close fight, but I'm going to have to rule for the original. So, you did raise some great points. Franck, I think they use him better in the second one. He's a bit too much for me, but I could see where people like him. Neither of you raised, and this was another of the reasons that I personally, I think if you have to take it as a whole, I probably like the second one better. Eugene Levy, man.
I meant to bring that up, and I just got caught up in all this, forgot. But
that's the funniest part of the movie when he when he turns to his and he like tells us like that's the best part of the whole movie.
It's like, how generous. Yeah, that was great. And they use him so much in that second one, whereas in the first one he just plays a singer. I think it's barely in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If literally all else had been equal, Eugene Levy would have pushed the second one over the top for me. But I don't think your failure to mention him was not a death knell to your case, Jeff. Just so you feel okay on that. It's close, but for all those reasons, you got to go with number one. I think you have to. It was well argued, though. I don't want to act like this was
Jeff argued it very well. He brought up some very good points. I was a little nervous there, honestly, for a while.
It's actually interesting because, like, the point, and you both seem to, it really sort of, stuck with you, that the contrivance of her being pregnant, and I'm willing to admit that it was. It's definitely a plot creation, right? They had to think of something. I do stick by my argument that it's the intensity with which that confronts George versus a granddaughter is what makes it.
Sure.
Was what makes it relevant. But the reason I say it's interesting is because I've probably seen both these movies over 100 times, and I don't think that's ever bothered me. It's just always kind of just like, oh, so that's interesting. I don't think it's either good or bad. It's just interesting that both of you felt that way.
I think bothers.
To be clear, like, it doesn't bother me. I'm just if in this.
I mean, you said you couldn't get over it, Steve. You said those words
for this decision making, because it comes back to relatability, I think.
And in this podcast we're doing, I had to argue a certain way, so that's what I chose to argue. It doesn't bother me. Yeah, again, I don't have any issue with it other than from a story perspective. I think with Steve, the point I was making, I think what Steve is making is that just it isn't necessary. And again, I think a point that you didn't bring up, Jeff, was with Eugene Levy, the whole selling the house. I mean, that could have been a part of it. And to me, that emanates much more naturally from the story and the universe of the first film. Having his wife be pregnant just seems like it's kind of this thing that just gets dropped into the middle of the movie. And I don't think it's necessary to make all the really good points you were making about the profound experience of aging and what that can do to people and what that means for different people.
To go back to your
That would
art
be interesting.
analogy, Jeff.
Okay.
Sorry. You said, for lack of, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm distilling this down too simple of a term, but like you can't compare like the surrealism of a Picasso with, I don't know, like a Winslow Homer or something that paints paints a more naturalistic thing. But that's not what we're doing. We're painting. Go ahead.
To be clear, it's not so much that you can't compare them. It's that trying to say that one has more value than the other as art because it's more realistic or something like that is not something that I think is a fair argument.
Okay, I agree with that, but I don't think that's what we're doing here. I think we're more comparing like early Picasso to late Picasso. It's the same artist painting with the same brushes, with the same paints, and does it all fit together in this world that they've created, this artist's oeuvre, for lack of a better word.
I'm not saying that. Yeah, I'm not saying
but it's
that.
easier to compare them one to one than if you're comparing two totally different. Well, go ahead.
I'm not saying the Beatles can't make "Please Please Me" and "Rubber Soul." They can do both those things. But the reason they can do both those things, and the reason I have no issue with it, or I guess why I take issue with the Picasso reference is maybe realism isn't I'm not using the right word, but I think in my final argument I used the right word, is it has to speak to some kind of truth. All art, fiction, nonfiction, needs to speak to some kind of truth. The reason we look at Picasso's paintings, and they're still very famous today, is because to him, he was painting with some kind of truth that spoke to him and spoke to a truth in the way that he saw the world. When we're looking at these two, I can't believe we're talking about this with these Father of the Bride movies.
I feel like that stomps on your point, though. When you put it that way, I feel like that stomps on your point because the truth that's revealed is his confrontation with his own mortality.
What I'm saying, though, is that if we look at these two movies, which it's actually very nice about these two movies, that there's just two of them. Now, they've remade it, and and this itself, by the way, is a remake of an old Spencer Tracy movie. I mean,
it was the remake.
Within the universe of these two films, they exist solely in their own universe. So the reason that I'm speaking about the second one not being as truthful is because if these two movies are sharing a universe, one of the movies speaks more to a truth than the second movie in the rules of the universe that the filmmakers have established for this story.
I don't think I follow that at all. I don't know. What are the established truths that the second one doesn't adhere to? I don't understand. Because, I mean, first of all,
I think
we're waxing rather philosophical about these two movies, and I don't think they're that deep. So,
that's
as much as I love them, the idea of this sort of universe where we establish rules, it's not. But it's not like trying to explain the Force in the Star Wars movies. It's nothing as deep as that. It's just an old curmudgeonly guy dealing with getting older in both movies, and that's sort of the through line in both movies. So I just fail to see how the second one sort of steps on that.
Okay, I'll explain it. Okay, to your exact
fucking
point.
Idiot.
It's not. It's not. I completely agree with you, Jeff. That the primary theme driving these movies is that George Banks is getting older. That is the theme that the character is dealing with. I feel like it is just not truthful that from a storytelling perspective, how is this guy going to deal with getting older? Well, let's just have him have another kid, a newborn baby. That doesn't feel very truthful for a story about a movie that begins with a man who he's a couple years ago, his daughter just got married, and now his daughter is having a kid and he's going to be a grandfather. There are more truthful ways for that story to proceed than, oh, and my wife is pregnant.
More relatable ways. More common to the human experience.
Maybe I'm getting hung up on this sort of truthful way, but like I don't understand how it's dishonest to have your wife be pregnant. I just don't see it.
I'm not making a blanket statement that it's a dishonest experience for someone's wife to be pregnant.
Well, you're saying it's not truthful. So dishonesty is the opposite of truth.
I'm saying in the universe of this movie, when we both agree that the theme of, sorry, I'm laughing so hard at how much we're arguing about this. I love it. That the theme of these movies is that George Banks is getting older, and it is about a man dealing with getting older. Right. There are more truthful and relatable ways to communicate that story, and the first movie does it great. If you're going to make a sequel to that, there are more truthful and relatable ways to communicate that story about, okay, now he's going to be a grandfather than, oh, and his wife is pregnant with a newborn baby. That's how he's dealing with aging. That doesn't seem.
I don't think that is untruthful in any way. That's a very truthful way of confronting aging. You're just getting hung up on the fact of how old they are when this is occurring. Like if he was about to turn 40 instead of 50, would this be as much of a hang up?
No, but then it would be a different movie. He's not just about to turn 40. That's not what the movie hasn't established those rules in this universe. That's not his age. You're right.
This is established rules. This is this isn't trying to fucking shoot down the Death Star with fucking.
There's a very firmly established dogma to this Father of the Bride.
I wonder
movies.
what the pitch Bible for Godfather, or I'm sorry, for Father of the Bride Part 2 was, you know.
Well, that goes back to what I was saying. Like, what was the pitch for this movie? What came first? Was it, let's see how George Banks deals with this encroaching feeling of getting too fucking old when his daughter has a baby? Or did they come up with the idea for him having a baby at the same time first?
Okay, I know the answer to this, and I wasn't going to bring it up, but I'm glad you just reminded me of this. If you want to go there, first Father of the Bride, they made it. It was something that, Nancy Meyers wrote it, and it was a thing. It got greenlit, and Steve Martin and Diane Keaton signed on. Great. The whole reason they made the second movie is because Steve Martin just had a fun time making the first movie and convinced Diane Keaton to make a sequel. That's it. And so that, I think, kind of speaks to this idea of like, okay, we got to figure out some zany things to happen to these characters. I think that the very way that this came into the world kind of speaks to this untruthfulness that I speak of.
Well, we've gotten very deep.
I just of all the disagreements that we've had,
it's one thing
to disagree. It's one thing to disagree, and I've disagreed passionately before, but it's been pretty rare that I simply cannot see your argument. I simply don't see it.
I think maybe
I just don't feel like these two movies established this baseline of truthfulness, and the second one essentially just I don't know, slaps the face of the first one by being untruthful to its premise, and I don't agree with that.
I don't think it slaps the face. I don't think the second one doesn't ruin the first one. I don't think it slaps it in the face. I like both the movies probably equally, if I'm being truthful about it myself.
Oh shit!
I just think that
is that word again.
Again, in the context of this podcast, when we're looking at two movies and we have to compare them and we have to debate them, I just think that from a storytelling perspective, if we're looking at this theme of this guy is getting older, and again, even Steve said this, our judge, I love, the way that the second movie starts, stays, very relevant to the kind of rules of this universe that these characters are going through. And then I just feel like dropping this other new baby into it, it messes with the story and how we as an audience can relate to it. It just does.
It ups the ante in an unnecessary manner. The baby, his daughter having a baby was a natural progression. But the additional complications of him having the baby at the same time, it's just a little too much.
It's funny because we mentioned
You
Picasso.
guys just have no imagination. That's the problem.
There's
Zero
a very
imagination.
there's actually one of the funnier lines in part 2 is the doctor when he reveals it to them. He's like, we're too old to be having kids. He goes, nonsense. Picasso had children way into his 70s. He's like, he was an artist. He could do whatever he wants. I'm just a regular Joe.
He is a regular
he
Joe,
also
by the way. Go ahead.
Well, and then he was like, when he's like, what? Who is it? You two-timing Mata Hari? And then she's like, oh, it was that time in the kitchen. And then he's like, oh, that was just a moment of passion. That, and then the doctor's like, you know how many moments of passion I've delivered over the years?
I like both movies. I think, Jeff, you argued it very well. So
And
I'm
I love
quite
both
happy
movies,
that I'm happy. I have appreciated this debate more than I've appreciated about any debate. The two most intense arguments we've gotten into on this podcast are Casino and Father of the Bride.
I think
So
you're
that's
forgetting A Bug's Life and Ants, which
we did. Yeah,
that's a good one.
Yeah,
That was
that one really was. Yeah, that one. Those
You
are
wanna talk
three
about
real
Truthful?
highlights. You want to talk about Truthful?
We're not bringing
These
that one
fucking
back.
ants that have 4 legs.
This has been a wide-ranging and very philosophical debate.
An important conversation for everyone to have.
I did not think we'd get to Picasso. Next week we'll
I
figure
totally forgot you brought it up, Nate. They even bring up Picasso in the movie.
Yeah, they do.
That's not even why I brought it up. I completely forgot about
that. Next week I want you guys to be prepared to discuss how Picasso's Guernica depicts life under fascism compared to the most recent South Park episode depicts our life under fascism. Compare and contrast. That's what this podcast is now. Art history.
I do, by the way, have the results of our poll, our audience score. They did. It was a little bit more, leaned a little bit more heavily this time, about a 70-30 split for the original. There were less people that voted this time. I had a little bit over 100 on various different platforms vote. But it was about 7. I think it was like 71-29 at the end for the original.
Wow, that's surprising.
Audience went with the original as well.
Even if I might have expected the original to win, not by that much. That's surprising.
Yeah, I thought it would be a little bit more even. I'm honestly very curious about the audience. I think that generally my followers, I think, will have a lot more to say about next week's episode, which I will let Steve reveal. The next 2 ones we're talking about.
That is quite the tease. And if only I'd been prepared to actually be able to tell you what next week's movies are.
Would you like me to go ahead and just reveal it myself?
Go ahead and do it, yeah.
Steve, you will be defending The Terminator. And Jeff,
you
will be defending...
That's my Terminator theme song. I don't know if you could tell.
Terminator 2, Judgment Day. I will be the judge. Brandon, of course, will be back always as our faithful producer. I'm really looking forward. This is a classic one. When I initially posted this whole argument on TikTok this summer, many people brought up Terminator versus Terminator 2. It's kind of a classic debate between
it's a big one.
Original and sequel. Kind of a genre shift a little bit. I won't step too much on the toes of what we're going to talk about next week, but similar movies, but also very different kind of movies and tone. So I'm excited to talk about those two.
So we've got one piece of housekeeping, at least. We added this at the end of last week. Godfather 2 is our current reigning best sequel. Does Father of the Bride 2 knock off the Godfather 2? I sure don't think so.
I don't think so.
No.
It's still there, sitting atop its pedestal.
How can such an untruthful movie knock off The Godfather
Exactly.
Part
That's
2?
exactly my point.
The Godfather Part 2 is so much better. I called my own movie I was defending The Godfather Part 2 half the time.
All right. Well, you guys got anything else? That was a fun one.
Socials, hit those socials again.
All right, hang on. I'll get them. Duelofthegreats@gmail.com is how you can send us messages. You can also reach us at Duel of the Greats on Instagram, Threads, and then on TikTok, we are at Duel Podcast. So there you go. Reach out. Tell us what you think. Tell us if we got it wrong. I'm pretty excited that I'm in line with the people so far. 2 for 2. I'm nothing if not a man of the people. Unlike
Exactly.
George Banks, who lives in a multi-million-dollar house and then acts like his in-laws are rich. This fucking guy spends
I did a
$100,000
TikTok
to buy his house
breakdown
back.
earlier this summer. I did a TikTok breakdown that, like, when adjusted for inflation, that wedding cost like $175,000.
It's incredible. And he runs a shoe company. Like, does Nike not exist in this world? Like, come on now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Pardon me.
trying to think what even I don't even know if there'd be an equivalent. Like, I don't even think that type of company could exist anymore. Like a regional shoe company.
I was thinking that as well. Yeah, it's like, no, I don't think so. Anyway.
It's all conglomerates now. There's no just small shoe companies.
Not very truthful of that film.
Yeah.
Either of them. All right.
Like Nancy
Interesting.
Myers.
All right, guys. Well, we'll see you next week. Terminator 2 Judgment Day.